Together again. So, last few sessions we were talking about the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, so the cornerstone to our civil liberties. Let's kind of dive into some kind of little hidden corners of the Constitution, some of these different amendments here. So, I'm not going to cover all of them, just kind of hit the highlights. And we're talking about the 12th Amendment. It's giving us the modern electoral college. Remember, in the original Constitution, the electors, they got 2 votes for president. Because the one most number of votes became president, and then the runner-up became vice president. And it worked fine as long as it didn't have political parties. But then the political parties start forming, and they form because it's easier to kind of get a group of candidates together with similar ideas and put a similar name on it so you can share resources and information and work together once you get into legislatures or Congress. So they decided they didn't want to give all that power, even the vice presidency, to the opposition party candidates. Except the vice president wasn't seen to do much. It was basically all their job is to cast tie-breaking votes in the Senate and wait for the president to die. Basically, he just didn't do a lot of the vice president in those days. That's really about the limit of their constitutional power. Just sit around, be the successor in waiting. But the opposition party decided they didn't want that, so started running tickets, president and vice president. Well, the 2 times that happened, you had party elections for president, 1796 to 1800. The system completely blew up. Person with the second most number of votes turned out to be not the 1796 election, not the Federalist candidate for vice president, but the opposition party candidate for president, Thomas Jefferson. So you end up with a Federalist for president and Jeffersonian Republican for vice president. The only time that's ever happened. And the next time, well, it deadlocks. Both candidates for president, both candidates on the ticket, presidential candidate Thomas Jefferson and vice presidential candidate Aaron Burr, both got the same number of ballots. Well, Burr didn't want to stand aside, even though he was the vice presidential candidate, and so it had to go to the House of Representatives where they had to vote on who the president was going to be. After 34 ballots, that is 34 rounds of balloting, it came down to 1 vote. The lone congressman from Delaware who voted for Thomas Jefferson for president. And after that disaster, they gave us decided to change up the system of the modern electoral college. Still controversial, even then. They didn't want to go to a direct popular vote. They didn't want to have Congress decide. They wanted an outside independent election. What they changed up was you now have distinct ballots for president and vice president. No consolation prize for the second place winner. For president and vice president. Vice president, by the way, is hyphenated. And then, as for president, decided in the House. Ties for VP, decided in the Senate. Now here's the thing. It has to be majority of the electoral ballots cast. So if some can't, so either they tie or no one gets a majority. Then they come up. Let's say, just for the sake of arguing, you have a situation where Harris gets 268 electoral votes, and Trump gets 265, and some other candidate gets like the remaining. Well, neither candidate would have gotten the number of ballots, the number of the majority of ballots cast, so it would have to go to the House of Representatives. They sometimes call today a contingency election. Around. Now, when it goes to the House, they vote by state delegation. Each state gets one vote. Delaware gets one vote, that's one congressman. Wyoming gets one vote with its congressman. California gets one vote with its 53 congressmen. Yeah, that seems fair. And the Senate, they just vote up or down who the winner's going to be. But still, you got the situation where the winner of the popular vote can conceivably lose the election because he lost the Electoral College. That's happened 5 times in American history. 1824, Andrew Jackson actually wins the Electoral College and the popular vote, but doesn't get the majority, so it goes to the House of Representatives to be decided. He loses in the House. Call that the corrupt bargain. 1876, Samuel Tilden wins the popular vote by about 25,000 votes, but loses the Electoral College by 1 vote. 1888, Grover Cleveland wins the popular vote by about 100,000 votes, but loses the Electoral College very narrowly. But he'll gain it back again the next election, 1892. Then nothing until 2000. Comes down basically the state of Florida, decided by about 538 votes. Al Gore won he was vice president at the time. He wins the popular vote by about 250,000 votes, but loses the Electoral College by a margin of 271 to 267. Over 500 votes in Florida. And then in 2016, Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote by 3 million, but loses the Electoral College. All 5 times this happened, it's all Democrats had won the popular vote. There are some people proposing going to a straight popular vote or kind of gaming the Electoral College where you get a bonus for the winning the popular vote, or they call it Interstate Voter Compact, where several of the states are getting together saying whoever the winner of the popular vote is, all the electoral votes in their state, regardless of how they vote, will go for the winner of the popular vote. Can they do that? Well, we're not sure. It's still controversial today. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, you have what's called the Civil War Amendments. Now, it's happening with a lot of states, particularly in the South. They are writing and rewriting their constitutions to solve all the changes that come along because of the Civil War. Among other things meant no more slavery, and the freedmen are now citizens. But at the federal level, they're trying to deal with solving the problems caused by the Civil War, or rather, to be more accurate, started by the Civil War, and make sure those problems would never happen again. 13th Amendment. Slavery is abolished nationwide. And it's the end of slavery. Interestingly enough, by the time this was ratified, December 1865, there were only 2 states left that still practiced slavery: Delaware and Kentucky. The rest basically had been ended by the post-Civil War, in the South had been ended by the post-Civil War governments there, and the North had long since disappeared. But there were still serious questions. What is the legal status of the freedmen? A lot of people say, okay, they're citizens now, treat them like regular citizens. What does that mean? Well, the 14th Amendment does a lot of things. Essentially, it codifies radical Reconstruction into the Constitution. It also states that all citizens are to be equal under the law. But the problem is, in practice, while it's there in the Constitution, they aren't really able to enforce equality under the law until the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That says here, now the one that's most of concern now is Section 1, one that really kind of most applies. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Because the Dred Scott decision in 1857 said African Americans cannot be citizens. Essentially, the Bill of Rights is for whites only. The 14th Amendment says no. We're throwing out that case, anything associated with it. We're establishing the order that was won by the Union Army in the Civil War, which is equality under the law shall be the law. You're not to have separate classes of citizens. That if you do, it's eventually you rob the freedom of one group. Eventually, you're going to rob the freedom of all groups. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Equality under the law. But also this applies to immigrants as well. All persons born are naturalized in the United States. Naturalized means to become a citizen. Now, it also means that anyone born in the United States is a United States citizen automatically. Period. Birthright citizenship. Something that doesn't happen in a lot of countries, but there's a principle here. Some countries, citizenship is based on, are your parents citizens or not? Or do you have one parent who's a citizen? The United States says no. Citizenship is not conferred on you by your parents. It is something that belongs to you and you alone. That you do not have to pay for the status of your ancestors or what your ancestors may have done. Your citizenship, your rights as Americans, those belong to you. And so you had a lot of citizens, yes, African American slaves who were brought over from Africa. They were not born in the United States. But by the time of the Civil War, the vast majority, though, were. There's still some who were brought in directly from Africa, but most the freedmen were born in the United States. This is their country. The status is you're born in the United States, you are citizens now, the equality of the law is your birthright. Now, the Three-Fifths Compromise was rendered ineffective by the null and void by the 13th Amendment, but Section 2 basically tried to make a point about the status of the freedmen. that if they were denied their rights, then these states would lose apportionment in seats in Congress accordingly. That is, if you wouldn't let African Americans vote, participate, or deny their rights, then Congress has the right to take seats away from states to do that. In other words, it's kind of concern among some of the radical Republicans and others during Reconstruction, which was the South lost the Civil War, which means the 3/5 compromise no longer applies, which means they now become more powerful politically for losing. Because in terms of apportionment, slaves only count as 3/5 of a free person. Now they're counting as fully as free individuals. So they get that extra political power because of that, extra seats in Congress apportioned because of that. 14th Amendment, that set clause says, you're not going to become more powerful politically if you're just going to keep doing business that you had before 1860. So you keep treating the freedmen as slaves, but under a new name. That's not going to happen. Equality under the law. Section 3 is an interesting one here. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector or president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, in the United States, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or executive or judicial officer of any state, shall engage in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or give an aid and comfort to the enemies thereof. The Congress may remove, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, may remove such disability. Basically saying Congress is giving the right to pardon Confederate officials, but otherwise, Confederate officials, those who waged war against the United States, they will never hold political office again. Not the federal level. But Congress did remove those disabilities for some of them. Just essentially here saying that pardon power wasn't just for the president, it was now also for Congress. Section 4 is kind of unusual here, but the Confederate debt. The Confederacy owed a lot of money to a lot of people. A lot of people made a lot of money in the South off of the Confederacy. But the Confederacy owed a lot of money. So Congress is saying through the 14th Amendment here that there is no longer Confederate debt because the Confederacy was an illegal organization engaged in illegal activities, namely rising up against the United States. And no one is going to make money off a rebellion against the United States. Is that Confederate debt? Gone. 15th Amendment gives African American men the right to vote. It's organized in a way that can specify African American men. Because the women's rights movement, here about 1870s, gaining steam, and they wanted Congress wanted to make sure that the freedmen, that is, the men, had the right to vote, but not necessarily the women. That's the 15th Amendment. So Congress believed that armed with the right to vote, equality under the law, equal rights as citizens, that should have been enough to protect the civil rights of the freedmen. But it wasn't, because the states weren't willing to enforce laws protecting the freedmen, and the federal government wasn't willing to either. So the issue just kind of simmered for roughly the next century. '16th Amendment. It's more than 40 years until the next amendment is passed. The Civil War amendments had been 60 years. Because all those divisions, no one could really There's only one real pressing issue, and that was slavery, and the states could not make an agreement on that. The 16th Amendment. In 1913, direct election of U.S. senators. Initially, senators are chosen by the state legislatures. They get one candidate together, nominate one candidate or a slate of candidates, vote on them, and the one with the most number of votes in the state legislatures, that would become their U.S. senator. The people did not vote on it. And so increasingly reformers in the 1880s and 1890s said that we, the people, deserve a vote on these people making laws in our name, on U.S. senators. So they insisted on this amendment, which calls for the direct election of the U.S. senator. This is the people voting for them directly. The legislatures are now taken out of the process. So direct election of U.S. senators. 17th Amendment. People don't like this one, but tax. The income tax is legalized through the 17th Amendment. What that meant was they tried an income tax several times before, most notably during the Civil War to raise money for the Union government. Basically just a tax on income. The more you have, the more you pay. But this income tax was struck down several times on the issue of apportionment. It is, the states were not collecting equal amounts of money from the different congressional districts because different congressional districts, they have different income levels. So the 17th Amendment took that away to say that yes, some districts may have to pay more taxes than others just because they have more rich people there. But it comes down to a matter of the individual and not the congressional district. That the Congress has the right to impose an income tax. It doesn't say it has to, it says it has the right to. And the first income tax was passed over this amendment was ratified. Income tax are between 1% and 6%. And to pay an income tax, to qualify for it, you had to make at least $5,000 a year. But in today's money, what a $5,000 salary meant in 1913 was you have to make about $80,000 a year just to pay 1%. And the 6% was on incomes over $500,000 a year. Be about $80 million a year. Or about $8 million a year. That's the 17th Amendment. 18th and 21st have to do with prohibition. Don't worry about that. 19th Amendment. Women getting the right to vote. At least under law, women have the right to vote. In some states, particularly with the South, minority women, they're still being blocked by poll taxes, literacy tests, and all sorts of restrictive laws trying to keep African Americans and other minority groups, especially African Americans, from voting. But those would still be in place for another 45 years. But overall, again, it guarantees that women would have the right to vote. That's rather an irony here that women who make up more than half the population, the first time they're ever even mentioned in the Constitution is the 19th Amendment, 1920. 130 years after it was ratified. It's only mentioned when they're only given the right to vote. Slavery was only mentioned when it was abolished. Because you don't see the word slavery anywhere in the Constitution. But everyone knew it was there. 20th Amendment's kind of an odd one. This is in 1933. Originally, the Constitution said that the president shall be inaugurated on March 4th, following the election. In a period of more than 4 months between the election day and the time the president is sworn in. A period in between they call the lame duck period. Why they didn't call it lame duck, I don't know. Just what they do. So on this one, the 20th Amendment, they moved the inauguration day from March 4th back to January 20th, which it's been ever since. Franklin Roosevelt will be the first president inaugurated on March 20th, January 20th, when this comes into effect for the inauguration in 1937. From March 4th back to January 20th. But yeah, the first time, though, this happens is in 1937. So on January 20th, 2025, a new president is going to be inaugurated. Not March 4th, where it was originally on the Constitution, but January 20th. There's also another part of this here. Congress, every new Congress has to convene on January 3rd. So by the time the president's inaugurated, the new Congress already been operating for a couple of weeks under the old president. So on that date, the electoral ballots are certified by law. It's January 6th. It's the new Congress certifying it, not the old one. The 22nd Amendment. This is in 1951. Presidents are limited to 2 terms in office. Presidential term limit amendment. Why was it only the president, not Congress? Congress wasn't the issue. Franklin Roosevelt was elected to 4 terms. 1932, 36, 40, and 44. Then Truman came in and was elected on his own 48. Republicans, even though Roosevelt was an extremely popular president before he died in 1945, very popular afterward, Republicans hated Roosevelt. Absolutely despised the man. And just couldn't believe he just kept winning, kept getting reelected. So they pushed through this amendment in Truman's time in office to limit the president to 2 terms in office. It's a direct response to Roosevelt. Now, the amendment did say that those people who had already served as president or presently serving as president, they could serve as many terms as they wanted to. They wouldn't be affected by that. But the only 2 people left alive have been president by 1951 are Herbert Hoover and Harry Truman, both of whom were extremely unpopular at that point. But 2 terms in office. Can a president serve more than 8 years in office? It actually is possible. But a very narrow set of circumstances has to happen. if a president dies 2 years into his term, or just over 2 years, his vice president then becomes president. And after that, the vice president, now president, can be elected to 2 separate terms in their own right. So potentially up to 10 years in office. Officially, they just didn't want to affect any future elections, particularly say if Truman wanted to run for re-election in 1952, and there were rumors he was thinking about it. But basically, the target of this amendment was Franklin D. Roosevelt. So Hoover was hounded out of office in 1932 by Roosevelt. He died at the age of 90 in 1964. He's already nearly 80 at this point. And still so unpopular because of the Great Depression. He's not getting elected to anything again. Truman is weighed down by charges of corruption and subversion and the Korean War that he's just no one wants really to support him at this point. Interesting enough, though, while Hoover's reputation continues to be very low among historians and political scientists, Truman today, years later, is considered to be one of the best presidents we've ever had. We sit back and look at just what he really did and what he really accomplished. But sometimes you just have to kind of sit back and say, you just kind of look at the totality of a man's reputation. Just see what all they really do. Let time and emotion, hard feelings kind of fade away to get an accurate look at it. As it happened with Harry Truman.
People saying previous presidents that it's like recently, not like recently, like from the 2000s onward. Do you think that
Their reputation to be rehabilitated, it's hard to say. Because Truman's reputation really doesn't start recovering until the 1990s, 20 years after he died. Part by his really impressive biography of Truman by McCullough. People start realizing, yeah, we really did a great job as president. But again, it's kind of hard to say. All the presidents of the 21st century are still alive. They're going to be reevaluated, probably. Different historians, different point in history, are going to be looking at different issues and kind of seeing them through those lenses. But we tend to see the past kind of in terms of present needs and future wants. How would they be judged later? Who knows? Ronald Reagan was very popular and left office, but since then, not a lot of people think he did a very good job in office. Jimmy Carter was hounded out of office in 1980. People today think he wasn't a great president, but he wasn't as bad as what we thought. Richard Nixon, his reputation has gone steadily lower because of Watergate. Obama's rated very highly, but he's still around. He's still able to defend his reputation, what he talked about. Biden, how's he going to be judged? We're not sure yet. He's still president. Who comes after Biden? We don't know yet. Find out in a month. But this kind of goes around back and forth. Andrew Jackson was extremely popular president after he died, but in the years since, especially since the 1970s, 1980s, his reputation's really gone down because they're looking at, well, he was a slave owner, and how did he treat the Native American tribes? And very poorly, because his reputation really has taken a hit. Actually, on a lot of reservations, they won't take $20 bills at their shops because there's a picture of Andrew Jackson on it, because they hate him that much. Ulysses S. Grant, after he left office, he was extremely unpopular for a long time because the Confederacy was still mad about him because of the Civil War, but a lot of corruption in his time in office. And periodically, people start kind of reevaluating, looking at Grant, what he did. Some people are like, well, he wasn't so bad, but they take another look at the corruption and the treatment of the tribes, think, yeah, he really was that bad. Goes up and down. He's kind of an upswing right now. The three most popularly highest rated presidents among historians and political scientists are usually, almost invariably, in any order: George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Washington, because he was first and did so, really kind of got the country going at a very uncertain time for the country and its place in the world. Lincoln, because of his service during the Civil War, and Franklin Roosevelt, because of the Great Depression and World War II. Led the nation through those very difficult and trying times. But again, our reputations kind of go up and down a lot. Like I said, don't become president or any position of authority like governor or mayor or anything else unless you understand that a third of the people are going to hate your guts just because of anything you did, especially president. Just do the best you can and be content that you did the best you could. The 23rd Amendment basically gives Washington, D.C. Electoral votes. They weren't going to make D.C. a state, but they were going to give it electoral votes, 3 electoral votes. That's in 1961. The first time they have it is the 1964 election. 24th Amendment. It's in response to the rising civil rights movement. The abolition of poll taxes. Even got some southern states to go against this because not every southern state had them. But the abolition of poll taxes. Remember, they're charging everyone $1 to vote, which meant, especially in 1964, $1. That's still a lot of money for a lot of people. And basically it's designed to keep African Americans across the South and Hispanic Americans in the Southwest to keep them from voting. Disfranchised millions of people. So the 24th Amendment, they got rid of that. Now, there's been some controversy in recent years because some states are requiring photo IDs, state-issued photo IDs to vote. But to get these photo IDs, you have to go to your Department of Motor Vehicle office and pay like $40, $50, $60. And some people are saying that's a poll tax. The court's really kind of undecided on that yet. But the poll tax is just having to pay $1 directly to vote. That was abolished in 1964 in the 24th Amendment. A lot of this is fairly more recent. 25th Amendment. This is in 1967. We talked about this briefly. We're discussing the Constitution. So the Presidential Disability and Succession Amendment. So it states very clearly, if the president dies or resigns, the vice president becomes president. The title and power. President dies or resigns or is impeached, if the office is vacated for some reason. Because it wasn't entirely clear in the original Constitution. They filed for this one in 1967, pushing that through. There are a lot of hearings and discussions about this. You have a vacancy in the vice presidency. This happened a lot. A lot of vice presidents had died in office. but there's nothing to fill the position of the vice presidency. So you'd have some presidents that are vice president for extended periods. William McKinley, after Vice President Garrett Hobart died in 1900, he was without a vice president for a year. Of course, he'd be dead within a year himself. Franklin Pierce, when he became president in 1853, his vice president, William R. King, was extremely ill, dying of tuberculosis. He died a month into his term in office, so for almost the full term, Franklin Pierce does not have a vice president. Same thing with Lyndon Johnson. When he became a vice president in 1963 after John F. Kennedy was killed, for the next year and a half, he didn't have a vice president. That concerned a lot of people, especially when he gave his State of the Union address in January 1964. The next two men in line, Speaker of the House and the President pro tem of the Senate, these are both men well into their 70s by this point. This time of this being past 70 was really old. So they needed somebody in office to fill that position quickly. Because a lot of this is stemming kind of what the nation's historical memory. 1967, you have every congressman, they probably knew John F. Kennedy personally. All of them remember the death of Franklin Roosevelt, because Harry Truman, when he became president in April 1945, it was almost his entire term without a vice president. 1945 until he inaugurated him for his full term in January 1949, almost a full 4 years. So a lot of these guys, they remembered Harry Truman and being no vice president. And a lot of them are still old enough to remember Woodrow Wilson. When Wilson had that massive stroke in 1919, he basically was unable to function in office, but there's no vehicle in place for what happens when a president just can't do the job physically or mentally. Some people suggested the vice president, Thomas Marshall, should step in and take over as acting president, but Marshall wouldn't do it. He said it set a terrible precedent. There's no legal mechanism for it, and so he refused to take over as acting president, even though Wilson was basically completely bedridden, could barely speak, couldn't even write. That's when his wife basically started taking over as president, basically making decisions for him, deciding what papers he should read, who he should see, and even guiding his hand to sign particular documents.
Why did the guy write that?
Vice President Marshall didn't do that because he was afraid it set a bad precedent, that they could see Wilson was sick, but what happens when the president isn't sick? And the vice president decides he just wants to take over. Yeah, they wanted to make sure he couldn't set up a vice president, couldn't overthrow his own president. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure that be something clear in place, even though there's just no mechanism in place. And there are a lot of fears, like especially after Kennedy was assassinated, people were asking, okay, what happens if what would have happened if Kennedy had survived that shooting? If he was just basically a vegetable. Actually, there were rumors after he died that he actually survived and was living at the White House. There were no truth to that rumor, but some people are dumb enough to believe anything. But anyway, Kennedy was dead as soon as that bullet hit him. Just took his heart a couple of hours to figure out it needed to stop beating. But there were people asking, what if the bullet was off just a little bit and he had survived, but as a vegetable, and able to speak or walk or do anything, he'd still be president? So that's another part of the 25th Amendment here. Not just vice president becomes president, but the idea of acting president. That comes here to Section 3. Whenever the President transmits to the President pro tem of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, his written declaration that he is unable to discharge the powers and duties of office, and until he transmits to them a written declaration to the contrary, such powers and duties should be discharged by the Vice President as acting President. This has been common since the 1980s. You have presidents routinely going in for surgery, some procedure, they have to go under anesthesia, and they have to, and because the president has to be able to respond instantly, can't be under anesthesia at the time of an actual process. Outside, the vice president will become acting president. Basically, act as president until such time as the president is recovered, conformed with the speaker and the president pro tem that he's ready to resume his job. And that's happened a couple of times. That's under Section 3. Basically, the president's in for surgery or whatever else. Temporary president, acting president. But also, suppose the president just goes flat out bonkers. He's a drunk, he's a drug addict, he's mentally ill, he's making weird decisions. What do you do then? And he's accepting, they're not taking anything in particular, but saying just what if. And the 25th Amendment is a lot about the what ifs, the things that have happened, the things that potentially could happen, the worst case scenario. So they're trying to figure that out. So whenever the vice president, majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or other such bodies Congress may by law provide, transmit to the president pro tem of the Senate, the Speaker of the House, the written declaration that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of office, the vice president shall immediately assume his powers and duties of the office as acting president. Yeah, basically, the cabinet can vote. Majority of the cabinet can vote to say the president can't do his job. The vice president must take over as acting president temporarily. What's that?
Wasn't the cabinet Trump's cabinet?
Yes. Several of his cabinet members were considering, after January 6th, after he tried to overthrow the government, of having him declared acting president, saying he is mentally unable to do his job. But they couldn't get enough people to say so, and so he just ended up resigning instead. He stayed in for the remaining 2 weeks in office, and the House of Representatives immediately impeached him, but the Senate refused to do anything about it. By the time the Senate got to it, Joe Biden was at the White House. But yes, that was how bad January 6th was. Trump basically tried to overthrow the government. He tried to assassinate his own vice president to make sure the Republicans in the Senate and the House would vote for him to become president again. And his cabinet tried to have him removed from office. So that's Section 4. Now, it isn't just necessary for such occasions, but also just the president is not mentally capable for other reasons. Reagan was suffering from the early stages of Alzheimer's disease when he left office in the second term. He started to slip very noticeably late in his first term. And he ended up dying of Alzheimer's in 2004. Well, thereafter, when the vice president transmits to the president and the Senate and the Speaker his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the vice president, majority of the principal officers of the executive department, transmit within 4 days the president to pro tem and the Speaker of the House saying the president is unable to discharge his powers and duties from office. Initially, the cabinet would say, no, he can't do it. The president can say, yes, he is. There's a back and forth there. because the president's an alcoholic or whatever else, then Congress shall decide the issue, simply within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. And Congress, then 21 days after the receipt of the latter written declaration, if Congress is not in session, within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, then it's 23 days, determines by 2/3 vote of both houses, the president unable to discharge the powers and duties of office, the vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. But it's what if there's a dispute between the two. In the end, Congress will decide it. But also, provisions for filling the the vice presidency. New VP can be chosen. The president will president nominates and is confirmed by a majority vote of both houses. So yes, you can become vice president, eventually president. No one ever voted for you. If you were chosen as vice president, then you become president. This portion here has only happened twice. When Spiro Agnew, Richard Nixon's vice president, resigned in October 1973, the vice presidency was vacant. Agnew resigned because he was just convicted of felony income tax evasion. He accepted a bunch of bribes. They couldn't prove the bribes. They could prove the income, and then they convicted him on that because he didn't declare the income. So, vice president with a felony conviction realizes he's going to get impeached if he doesn't, and removed from office. He doesn't resign. If he doesn't resign, so Nixon nominates the House Minority Leader, who was Republican Gerald Ford, a congressman from Michigan, for him to become vice president. So Ford becomes vice president in 1973, Gerald Ford. And then when Nixon resigns, less than a year later, August 1974, because of Watergate, because Republican senators told him if he doesn't quit, he's going to be impeached or removed. They got a new vacancy in the vice presidency because now Gerald Ford has now become president. And who chooses this vice president? New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller, who is vice president, is confirmed by both houses of Congress and serves until Ford leaves office January 1977. That's the 25th Amendment. A little complicated to get into the details of it, but basically, provision for how to get a new vice president, acting president, but also, more specifically, vice president does become president if the president dies or resigns. 26th Amendment, near the end here. This is in 1971. This is a response to the Vietnam War. 18-year-olds gain the right to vote. Lowering the age from 21. Because up until this point, the vote was you have to be at least 21 to vote. But because of the Vietnam War, you had a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds being drafted and having to fight in a war where they had no say in this. They couldn't vote for Congress or Senate or President, but they have to go to fight in this war anyway. So a lot of protests over that. So the war is kind of winding down. The 26th Amendment was ratified saying, giving 18-year-olds the right to vote. So you're 18 now, you have the right to vote. You've had that right since 1971. 27th, this is actually part of the original package of amendments that would have come to the Bill of Rights, ratified in 1992. Congressional pay raises. So initially that was part of the Bill of Rights, but it fell just short of ratification, so it's not part of the original Big Ten. But it's kind of floating around for a while, and eventually it's ratified 203 years after it's first proposed, saying that Congress is going to give itself a pay raise, then there needs to be an election first before that pay raise goes into effect. In other words, you're in Congress and you vote yourself a big pay raise, you need to go home and explain to your voters just why you did that. And they get the final say whether that was okay or not. There have been all sorts of shenanigans in the past over that. Now, there are others always proposed, like we've seen, others in the works. A couple of various stages of ratification, legal limbo, but most notably the Equal Rights Amendment and the Child Labor Amendment, some kind of floating around out there. But these are the 27 that have been ratified, part of the Constitution and part of how the government operates. 17 amendments have been ratified since the Bill of Rights was ratified in 1791. 27 altogether. The Constitution has remained relatively stable, especially consider, let's say, like the Texas Constitution, where you had like 400 amendments to their Constitution in 1877. But it's kind of a long, detailed process where you have to kind of sit down and really kind of think about it and discuss it and get a lot of support behind it. But 27 amendments, 17 since the Bill of Rights, and possibility for more in the future because of the amendment process in the Constitution. But remember, like we said, the federal government and political science in general is two things you have to know to understand political science is the numbers, look at the votes, who's voting, where they're voting, the demographics, the data, and the rules. Data we're looking at with these election results and election polls coming in. The rules we're studying with the Constitution. I'll dive into some more of that process more next time, so keep reading your book. If there's nothing else, we'll call it a day.